So welcome everyone. Today we'll be speaking to Rachel Starr, who's another one of our authors from the forthcoming book, Deconstructing Whiteness, Empire and Mission. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
So could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So I'm one of the Methodist tutors at the Queen's Foundation in Birmingham, and I mainly teach around biblical studies, but also some work on feminist theology. And I describe myself as a feminist theologian, and I'd also describe myself as a white British woman. So a kind of variety of ways of identifying myself, I suppose, to start the conversation.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So could you briefly describe what your chapter's about?
Yes, thank you. So the chapter is a kind of bit of a dialogue between a piece that I wrote over 20 years ago and reflections today. In fact, it's kind of a bit of payback for all those times that we asked students at Queen's to reflect theologically on something, and I was doing that to my own work. It's quite a painful process at times, thinking, oh my goodness, did I really write that? And I was actually quite tempted at a few times to think, no, I'm going to take out the whole of the original piece and just write what I want to write now, but kind of went on and realised actually this dialogue between two different moments in my life is really helpful. So the original piece was about kind of becoming aware of my white identity and reflecting on it. And then the later annotations were kind of, I suppose, exploring how I was seeing some of the things that I talked about in a little bit more nuanced way, recognising that I'd maybe been overly optimistic in my first piece of writing, and I needed to be a little bit more nuanced, a bit more reflective about the continued challenges of kind of engaging appropriately with race and racism and racial injustice as a white person.
Thanks for that. It's interesting the way you've described that process. Thank you. So what made you take this particular approach to your chapter?
Yes. Well, I suppose it was prompted from conversations with yourself and Anthony, from my recollection, and you kind of initially invited me to think about reflecting on that original piece, which had emerged from teaching that I was doing at the time with Anglican, Methodist and United Reformed students in Salisbury. So it was also recognising that it's helpful for me as a theological educator to continue to reflect on my own practice and the similar kind of work that I'm seeking to explore around critiquing whiteness, white privilege and white power with students here at Queen's, with alongside other colleagues. So there was a sense of trying to kind of again kind of think about that journey and perhaps to kind of recognise that, as painful as I found revisiting some of my what I would see as kind of naive assumptions, that was helpful in kind of revealing something that others might find helpful. In terms of what we can see, what helps us to see things more clearly, and the work that is needed to keep on challenging ourselves and keep on, I suppose, growing really in one way or another.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So what would you say has shaped your social conscience in terms of things like race and inclusivity?
Perhaps most particularly, I think, my experience of studying in New York, that was a real turning point for me. And that's really where I kind of began a lot of the work around thinking critically about white identity. So I did my master's in New York, and it was there that I think I had I encountered people from a whole range of different backgrounds and identities who were confident in themselves and were confident in naming who they were, and also through that confident in allowing the space for other people to be who they were. And that was, looking back, I kind of realised how significant that was for me, because there wasn't people expected me and everybody else to bring their whole selves into conversation and to be clear about who that whole self was and what particular place that placed you within the room. So that was really shaped my my kind of sense of engagement with questions about equality, diversity, and inclusion. That kind of space that was both a space that was held confidently by others, to say, this is who we are, we want to know who you are, and we want you to really be honest about what that does to you in terms of the power that you access and what questions you need to ask of yourself. I hope that in my work I'm seeking to do something a little bit similar, to bring a space where people can be honest about who they are, into that space. I mean, that's hard work. I'm not always skilled at doing that, but I think that's what I'm trying to do in my work. I think the other thing, the two other things that kind of have shaped me, the experience of teaching and working alongside Black and Brown colleagues in theological education and teaching around challenging racism, racial justice and identity, and seeing how students have reacted, have they've responded, that also is really significant. Trying to kind of figure out how I can be a supportive presence in that space. And I think the third thing that has influenced me particularly was time spent living in Latin America. So I've spent kind of various moments of my life, I've lived in Latin America, most recently in Buenos Aires when I was doing my doctoral studies. And there I really kind of got the sense of how identity just changes so much within context. So who I was different there, and to who I am in the UK or in the States.
Yeah.
But also as an outsider to that society, it was much more visible to me what were some of the questions and issues around identity, and particularly whiteness. Argentina has this long history of claiming whiteness as a nation, and in the process erasing the reality of the fact that many of the original people, Pueblos Originarios, local people, and enslaved Africans who were trafficked there were present, but their history and sometimes also their bodies, often their bodies also were erased. So in Argentina, that was very visible to me, but sometimes not visible to those who were within that society. And that helped me to think, what is visible to others about the UK that I don't see as a white woman within the UK, and what challenges do I need to keep listening to, so that I can keep having that perspective that is from a different space.
Yeah, thank you. A big question. What do you think are the biggest challenges to the church and wider society in terms of creating frameworks for social justice?
Yeah, that is a big question. For me, at the heart of it, it's about helping us to recognise where we've gone wrong, and that can be on an individual level or on a kind of systemic historical level. So the discussions that are happening a little bit more at the moment within churches about enslavement, the history of enslavement and reparations is really important. And alongside that, those conversations that we might have just really in individual interactions around where we have got things wrong, where we have failed to notice things, where we have used our power problematically. I think it's so hard for people to say that they've made a mistake. I mean, I know that even with people that I love, that I'm close to, that I trust, my family, I know in myself when I do something wrong, it's really hard for me to acknowledge that in a way that's not like passive aggressive, So I think how much more so, even more so, when you're acknowledging wrongdoing that is even more complex than, you know, who forgot to bring the washing in or whatever. You know, the stakes are much higher, and so it's even harder to say, actually, I've got this wrong. I made a mistake. I need to recognise what I've done, and then even more so when it's kind of historic institutionally. So that sense of learning how to acknowledge our wrongdoing and how to work out with others a way of not necessarily restoring, but stepping forward together in some way, in a more hopeful, healthy way, is really, really important. And then I think, secondly, maybe coming back to something I said earlier about recognizing how vulnerable people are, and how do we make spaces in the church and in wider society where people are able to be everything that they are, and therefore have the security to allow other people to be everything they are. So I suppose those two are kind of very broad themes about recognizing mistakes and kind of making space where people can be vulnerable.
Yeah.
But to me, they relate to lots of those kind of struggles for justice, including racial justice within the church and a wider society.
Thank you. So to finish, what do you hope people might take away from reading your chapter?
I think I hope an encouragement. I hope they don't judge me too much. I may well judge me. I judge myself for sure. But I think an encouragement that we need to keep reflecting honestly on who we are, what learning we need to do. We need to keep being open to learning and change, and, you know, growth sometimes sounds kind of a problematic word, and I think particularly in a book and a collection that's thinking critically about mission and colonialism, growth can have kind of really problematic connections. But I think in terms of formation and development and our deeper understanding of ourselves and our place and our role in the world, I hope my chapter will encourage people to do that work for themselves, to tell their own story, and to listen to how others might challenge that story, and to recognize you can do that, and you need to keep doing that. That's really important.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Well, it's been really interesting talking to you.
Thanks,
and I'm sure people will be intrigued to read your chapter and take on board some of those ideas. So thanks for spending the time with us today.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.